Hey guys, so the topic for today is AJAX. AJAX originally stood for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. The XML part doesn't really apply anymore, I guess. It really just means making a JavaScript call to a web server and getting a response back in some form of metadata. You don't really have to use XML. You don't have to use JSON. It can be just string data. The important part is that you're kind of making an asynchronous request to a web server and receiving a response back without refreshing the page. So that's kind of the important part. The two aspects that define it are, one, it being asynchronous, and that meaning, other things can happen while you're waiting for the reply to come back. So, if you make the call and the web server for some reason is really slow, other things can happen. You can make other asynchronous requests while you're still waiting for the first one to come back. That's not even mandatory, actually, in AJAX. You could make a completely synchronous request. When people say AJAX, they really are talking about one particular quality. That's the second part, which is, you don't refresh the page. So the reason that's important is because you get a lot of what's called kind of like a responsive feel to the page. So instead of, basically, if you clicked on something and you wanted to modify, one word or a little section on the screen, you wouldn't see this whole page refresh and the whole page blinking. That's kind of a heavy and clunky kind of feel. Instead, you want to just click on something and just have that part change. So, pretty much any time we make a server call, get back a response, and do something without refreshing the whole page, that's kind of colloquially referred to as AJAX. So if you come here to the jQuery API for AJAX, you can see here there's a big library of methods that do various things. The one that we're going to focus on pretty much is this one, jQuery.ajax. This is going to enable us to do the very basic aspects of asynchronous calls. And also we're going to play around with this one a little bit, jQuery.get. It's kind of a shortcut method. And I'll show you how to do some stuff with this. I guess I will wait until the end to kind of tell you what I want you to focus on for the assignment. For now, let's just get into some code examples, and I'll explain as we go along. I will say before we start though that obviously, since this is it's kind of a front-end web development course, we are showing some C# examples, but that's kind of just like a bonus. The focus of this course is really on the front end. So if you don't understand all the C# that I wrote, no biggie, don't worry about it. Just kind of try to hang in there. So here in my web dev repository is Introduction to AJAX. So I'm going to open up that up in VS 2012 for web. So actually, I'm going to try to get this all in one video because this code that I wrote turned out being really, really short, which I was happy about. I thought I was going to have all this code and have to do a bunch of videos, but it's actually really short. So here's what I have. I have, this is my view, my one and only view. It's the home view. So this stuff you've seen before. I just have a page title, which comes from, if we look at, I'll actually open up the home controller. And let me close this stuff up for a second so you don't have to look at that. So this is just what we've been doing before. This is just to show you, hey, here's my home model. Well, what's a home model? Let me look at the models. The home model is just an object with a single string called page title that I can use if I want. So I take that, I say create myself a new home model, set the page title to Intro to AJAX, and then as soon as I load the view, have that model and send it to the client from the server. So this is what we've been doing in the past. And then in my view, back here again, here in the title, in the header section, I say, hey, that page title that we got in the model that was sent over from the server side, use that to set the page title. So we should see in the tab for the whole page, Introduction to AJAX. So hit F5, launch this thing, and drum roll, there we go. So Intro to AJAX way up here at the top is the title of the page that we got from the server model. So that's what we covered before with the basic model view controller in MVC4. So now this other stuff, here we have obviously our jQuery link. here I have just a link to my style sheet, and here I have a link to my JavaScript file. So now I have two divs. These are just divs with text in them, as you already saw. The top one says get mock response no data, and I have a class on it called button1. So for now, it will just ignore the stuff underneath, because there's basically two examples that I have here to give you two kind of intro to AJAX examples. So we're just going to focus first on button1. So just like we've been doing before with unobtrusive JavaScript, we don't want to say anything here about the behavior. If we want to see anything about the behavior, we go into the JavaScript layer. So all that we have here is a div with the class button1. So if I open up my JavaScript file, which is in scripts home.js, so here at the top, I'm creating my scope. I'm saying I have an object called home, and everything that I do, I'm going to work with inside of that object to give myself some scope. I'm going to close that up and close that up. Actually, I'll keep that one open. So if you look down to the bottom here, when the document is ready, just like we've done before in jQuery, I'm using jQuery to say find any element that has the class button1 on it and attach a click event. So anytime the click event gets fired, I want to run this function, home button1 click, which is this function right here. So anytime somebody clicks the guy with the button1 class, which is this guy right here, basically anytime somebody clicks that div, this top div here, which is just, it's just a div with some text and a border around it. The reason it's got the border is because if I look at the actual style, I can see that it has a width of 250, 1 pic solid black, and some margins. So all easy peasy, everything that we've done so far, nothing new. Whoops. So back here into my JavaScript. So anytime I click it, it's going to run all the code inside here. So now we're getting into actually AJAX. So the way this get function works, the get is actually what they call kind of a shortcut method. It actually invokes a different version of $AJAX, but we'll, in the second example, we'll kind of see a more comprehensive use of that. But for now, we're going to just use the simple get. This is pretty much the simplest AJAX method you can call. It takes two parameters. The first parameter is just the URL of your controller, and more than just your controller, but the actual method name on the controller. So if we stop right there for a second and open up our controller, so the home controller and the method get mock response no data. So I'm going to open up my controller, and I'll notice here that I have a method with a return type of JSON result. So that means literally it's going to return just a big string in JSON format. And I've marked it with this tag. If you don't understand tags in .NET, that's okay. All you need to understand is this kind of marks it as a get. There's basically 4 verbs in, there's like 4 verbs. I'll do a notepad. Whenever you're working with HTTP, there's usually 4 verbs. Sometimes they call it CRUD. But it's like get, post, update, delete. And CRUD is like create, remove, update, and I forgot. Let's see what actually CRUD stands for. HTML CRUD. CRUD operations. Create, read, okay, use, whatever. So, the point being is get, post, update, delete. That's what I usually talk about, but CRUD means the same thing. So we're really going to be working with get. Update means, okay, so like get means you want to obviously just get a resource from the server, just give it to me. Post means you want to send an information, basically create a piece of create a resource on the server. Update means you want to target a resource that already exists and modify it, and delete means you want to completely remove it. So conceptually, those 4 operations, whatever you want to call them, whether it be CRUD or GPUD, either way, And we're only going to be working with get, because basically once you understand just how to access the web server and talk to a resource, it really doesn't matter which of the operations you're doing. You can figure it out very easily and make the adjustment. So the whole point of that little tangent there was just to explain that we're marking this as one of the 4 types of operations in your standard RESTful. Anytime you hear somebody say RESTful, I'm not going to totally go into REST right now because we're going to talk about that later, but REST also means like kind of confining yourself to those 4 verbs when you're dealing with resources. So what this does, I guess let's talk about this again because I kind of went off on a tangent. So we started with this JavaScript and we said, actually let me go back all the way here. So we have this button and it has the class button1 on it, so that's a div. And then here we said, as soon as the page is ready, wire up a click event to that guy with the button1 class. And as soon as the click event, anytime the click event gets fired, we want to call this function, home.button1click. So it calls this anytime we click on it. And then $.get is a jQuery method that performs an AJAX get, obviously. And the first parameter of that is the URL, like we said. So into the home controller, in the method called getMockResponseNoData. So back to where we were before, it's going to find getMockResponseNoData inside of the home controller and invoke it. And since the return type is JSON result, it's going to return us some JSON. So I've got a little bit of fancy code in here that I wanted to write just to make this simple. I didn't want you guys really overthinking what the server is doing. I just want you to understand that it's just returning this mock response. So just to be fair and show you the actual C# code that I wrote, the first function that I wrote is called Serialized Object. It's actually an extension method, so if you look over here in extensions and open up JSON result extension. So I wrote this method Serialized Object to say, if you give any object, just basically create this JavaScript serializer, pass it the object that you want to serialize, make sure it's configured to allow gets, and then return it. And just in case you're not familiar with the terms serialize and deserialize, generally serialize means to take a complex object on the server and break it down to some more raw form, like pure text or even bytes. So that's what serialize means. And to deserialize means to take the raw data and convert it back to the object graph that you had. So we're going to be using those terms a little bit just so you know what they mean. So this first part here says I'm going to serialize something into basically string form, and what I'm serializing is this, and this name data response. I have this mocks folder over here, and in mock response I just have some static objects that I created as just examples of things that I want to send back. So name data response, I just created a list and then I added 2 people to the list, and I returned just an object that has that in it. So person is just something with a name and an age, and then this guy here, mock data or name data response, is really just a list of 2 people. So long story short is when the controller ends up serializing that list with the 2 people in it, this whole thing is going to return me just a string of JSON that says, like here's your list of 2 people with their names and their ages. So it's actually really simple when you boil it down. We make the AJAX get call. It's going to come in here. It's going to invoke this method, and it's going to give us back a string in JSON format. So even though it looks kind of scary, it's actually really, really simple. Going back to the JavaScript, so that was the first parameter, and just by virtue of that, it's going to do all that I just described. It's going to locate the controller, locate the method, invoke it, get back the response. The second parameter to this get method is a function, which is going to have 2 things inside of it: the return value of the method that we just called on the server, and a status, so an HTTP status code, like 404 would be not found, 200 is okay. We're not really going to worry about the status right now because we're going to get into big, a lot more comprehensive details and techniques of all this stuff in the coming weeks. Right now we just want to get the basics of AJAX. So calls the method, comes back, the response will be in the first parameter when it comes back. And remember this, when you're dealing with asynchronous, this function here won't be invoked until the server call is complete. So just keep that in mind. So just to show you what happens when I click on it, the first thing is it's going to alert raw response data. So I'm going to go over here and I'm actually going to click this, and notice it says it alerted this JSON string exactly as we expected. So there is the data is like the parent node, and then inside it has the list of the two people. So it's very simple. It just it took an object graph that I manually created on the server side, sent that. It actually serialized it into a string, sent it over to the client, and I caught it back here on the flip side when it returned, and then I just alerted that string to the screen. So I just have a string here, very simple. So the cool part here of this that I wanted to show you is that you know, you can just call this JSON.parse, you know, like we did last week. We worked with JSON a little bit, and you can take that string and basically reconstruct the object graph that was on the server here into this object. So JavaScript and, you know, JSON and jQuery, it can do all this stuff really easily. So bam, in one line I have deserialized data, which is an object graph. It's basically, you know, the list. So well, actually, you know, it has the data property, which is the list of those two people. So if you notice here, I have a for loop. I'm saying, you know, deserialized data.data is actually the list of people. So if I iterate through it, I'm going to see, you know, I'm going to be able to have access to the names and ages of those people. So even though up here I just had this big string of JSON, you know, you deserialize it, and then you have an object graph to work with. Obviously, that's very powerful. You can have as much information as you want on the server side, send it over in string form, deserialize it, and then, you know, program away. And, you know, you have all kinds of functionality, and you can do whatever you want with it. So proceeding on, you know, with the once I hit OK, we can see it's iterating through the names and ages of the people. So that's kind of the first example. That's just like half of it. I just wanted to show you a simple example of, you know, how you can target a method on your controller, and it comes back with you know, a response, whatever you program it to do on the server side. And, you know, just to be clear about what I said before, you know, about focusing on the front end, this is kind of the main knowledge that I want you to understand here is, you know, how this thing works, right? So this is the key here. I want you to understand everything in home.js. If you feel uncertain about some of the stuff that's happening over here in the C#, you know, I'm not too worried about that. As long as you understand that this get method is targeting this URL. That URL doesn't even have to be local. It can be somewhere, you know, somewhere out there on the internet. You know, it can be anywhere. So this just says contact this method, and as soon as that method returns, then invoke this function. This is, you know, what's called a callback. The callback function executes upon completion, and then all the code that I write inside of this function is going to execute no matter what the response was. You know, there could be error information in here. If this thing is not found, the status could be 404. Doesn't matter, you know. So just understand that the way this get method works is it takes URL, and when the URL returns, it comes back with this function call. And, you know, you can see that back here in the jQuery AJAX API. So if we go to the get method, where are you? There you are. So there's detailed information here. You know, there's more stuff that we can do here that I'm going to show you in a second. But, you know, here is another example of how they do it. So there's a lot of stuff that we can do with this, but just, you know, understand that this is kind of the skill we're learning this week, is, you know, how to target specific methods on the controller and get response, you know, kind of customized responses back. It's very powerful because it allows you to kind of set up a set of services on the server side, and, you know, it's basically like having a bunch of questions that you can ask and get the answers for, and then once you get the answer, you can make all kinds of changes on the client side without you know, refreshing the page. So, you know, right here, all I'm doing is I'm iterating through my object graph and printing stuff, but I could do much more than that. You know, I could start building content, you know, with jQuery. I could start creating sections. You know, I could create a section for every person and start building content for their name and age, and I could style it with CSS, and I could just do all kinds of stuff. So it's really, really powerful. You're going to be using AJAX all over the place with a sophisticated web application. So very, very important to understand this block of code here. All right, so moving on to the second example. I'm going to minimize this guy here. So I've done the same exact thing with the second button. So the second button says get message based on zip code. So this is going to be a little more interesting. So that's going to, anytime that button is clicked, it's going to call this second method here. So what I've done here is I've actually used the .ajax jQuery method instead of get. And get is actually really just a shortcut call to this Ajax method, and it kind of excludes this data aspect of it, because before we were just providing a URL and then providing a function. If you have the Ajax call, though, you can really provide a lot more detail. So I'm gonna, even though I printed it nice and concise like this, I'm gonna kind of break this up a little bit so you can read it easier. So let's see, how should I say this? The first, actually, you know, when you have an order, or when you have a list of parameters here that are listed, notice, you know, they're inside these curly braces, which implies JSON notation. And, you know, a JSON object is basically a dictionary, so order doesn't matter. So I can order these in any order I want. URL doesn't have to be first. You know, they're name value pairs, right? Here's the name, here's the value, here's the name, here's the value. So, you know, not to repeat the stuff that we learned in JSON, or in the JSON week again, but just to remind you, you know, this is JavaScript object notation. This is JSON format. So it's basically just, you know, a recursive dictionary where you just keep filling it up with name value pairs. So I've given it 3 name value pairs. The first one is URL, which it behaves the same as we did before. It's targeting a method on the controller. And then I'm also giving it a data variable. And the data property is itself a JSON object. I've chosen to make it a very simple one that just has a single name value pair. So the name is zip code, and the value is go find something in the HTML with the class of zip code and find its val. This is another jQuery function to find its value. And that's actually very simple. What that does is it comes here and it finds my zip code input on the screen because of this class. It finds it because of that, and it looks at its value. So basically, whatever I type in here. So if I type in 1, 2, 3, what's going to happen here is it's going to find that text input, and it's going to find the number 1, 2, 3. So this name value pair is going to be the zip code is 1, 2, 3. So that's my data node. And what this data node is going to do is it's going to be sent along to the get method. So it's not just get me this, it's get me this, and by the way, you know, here's some information. It's like, you know, parameterizing, basically parameterizing the get request with, you know, as much data as you want. You can have a very complex object graph in there if you want, but I just have a very simple you know, single object with a single property on it. So you can get as crazy as you want here, as long as it's one, you know, one JSON object as the value of the data. And these are the URL, data, and success. These are keywords in the AJAX method. So you have to have these be actually those words. The values can be whatever you want, though. So the URL, the data I'm passing along, and again the success function. You can have an error function as well, but today we're just going to kind of do happy path. So, you know, we're going to pretend it's always going to work, and that's going to take the result, which again is going to be, you know, the string that I get back from the server, and just alert it. So this is really the same as the previous example, except for 2 differences. One, I'm using the AJAX method instead of the get, which provides me with a few more parameters, and the second difference is that I'm actually using one of these other parameters, data, to send some other information, which happens to be the value of my text box, along with the request. So that's very simple. We just need to go to the home controller, find this method, and know that it's going to be called, but it's going to be called with some information. So back into my controller, close that up, and now I'm going to open up this guy instead. And notice this guy over here that we called before didn't have any parameters because we didn't pass it any information. We just said, hey, give me the mock response. But this time we said, hey, by the way, here's this data node. And I created this input model to kind of receive it and to absorb it and hydrate that information into an object in memory. So if you look in my models, input model, hey, see what I did? I created a property on it called zip code. So if you do it in this way, if you create a model that mirrors the JSON, we call this the payload. You know, if we mirror the payload on the server, it's going to automatically take this and basically instantiate and hydrate that object graph on the server. And so long story short, this zip code is going to magically appear in my object of type input model. So that's really good. It's really easy. All I have to do is say, hey, you're going to get some JSON, and it's going to match the the structure of this input model. So I'm automatically going to get this object model. It's going to have the zip code inside of it. So that's great. It's really useful. So it's some like MVC magic for us. So now I have some simple code in here. I don't have to explain the serializer again because it's doing the same thing as before. It's just this time 2 different responses. All I'm doing is I'm looking at the zip code and I'm saying, hey, is the zip code there and is its length 5? If so, I'm going to send back this. And what is that? That is mock response.zipcode form, which is an object with an error property which the value is your zip code was not formatted properly. So I'm either going to get an OK or an error. So the techniques for how to handle responses, error handling, status codes, that is a big topic all to itself that we're going to cover later. For now, like I said, I just want to do happy path. I just want you to understand that instead of just a plain old get, now we're going to do a get and say, well, I'm not just going to return a response. I'm going to think about some information that I sent to the server with the request and potentially, give a different response depending on whatever, my code was. So in this case, I'm like, oh, well, if the zip code's okay, I want to send one response. I also want to send something else. This is just to exemplify that you can, do as much logic as you want on the server side before you decide to send the response. Obviously, on both the server side and the client side, you might want to, make all kinds of decisions. You can have all kinds of architecture and design. It could be very simple or it could be very complicated. It's completely up to you. As long as you understand the mechanics of making these requests and being able to handle the responses, it gives you the power to, start thinking about some of these more advanced topics. So, long story short, we can actually do a little bit of debugging here. So I can put a breakpoint here on my get response based on zip code, and then I can run my program. Let me close this all just to make sure I'm running it. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to first leave the zip code blank, and I'm going to click get message based on zip code. Actually, let me put in a 1, 2, 3. So now we can see that this method here, when we clicked the second button, it called the AJAX method. It found this method on the home controller, it called it, and it should have attempted to pass this object, right? So the data with the zip code inside. And if we go back to the server here, where our breakpoint is, you'll notice that the model that came in as the parameter has a zip code of 123 inside of it. So there's, the MVC magic that we were talking about. So that's really good. So the code says if it's not null and if the length equals 5, but the length is not equal to 5, it's 3. So it's going to skip that. It's going to come down here. It's going to serialize that error message. Your zip code was not formatted properly. Then it's going to send that back to the screen. So you can see what I did on the client side is I just alerted the result. So simple as that. It's very simple. So if I have nothing here, your zip code is not formatted properly. If I have too much, zip code is not formatted properly. But if I have exactly 5 numbers, it should say OK. So it's pretty much like everything that I wanted to show you. I mean, it's like I said, the sky's the limit when you want, as far as complexity. But it's really based on just simply understanding, how to target a particular method on a controller, and understanding that it's going to that information is going to come back in the format that you specified. And in the case of JSON data, you have the ability to deserialize that back into an object graph. You can just send string information back. You really have the power to kind of do anything you want. And this hopefully this week, just by understanding the basic mechanics of AJAX, that can like open up discussions into, well, now that I know what this is, let's talk about the different techniques, the different methods of approaching this tool that we can use, and discuss the pros and cons of certain approaches. How to utilize the status codes, error and success scenarios. What type of data should I send object graphs? Should I send JSON? Should I send what basically what techniques are the proper techniques in order to accomplish what I want to do. And obviously, a lot of this stuff can be really subjective, but we're going to talk about kind of like best practices, or at least common patterns. So kind of to wrap this up, I don't want to talk about that too much, because it obviously it opens up a discussion into what we're going to be getting at in the coming weeks. For now, I really just want you to be able to work with these very simple AJAX calls. But I do want to talk for a couple of minutes about single page design, just because I think it might get your thoughts going, get you thinking a little bit about what AJAX is really used for a lot out there in the industry. So about we started off by talking about how you don't have to refresh the page when you make an AJAX call. You basically make the call, the response comes back, and you handle it in JavaScript, and you do whatever. You can do nothing, you can do something, you can change elements on the page, but it doesn't refresh the entire page. So kind of the power of that is if you get complex enough, or I shouldn't say complex, if you get sophisticated enough, you can do things like in this case here we're saying go to this method and get some information back based on this information that we're sending along. If you take that and get sophisticated enough, you can do things like, what, I really want everything that I'm looking at right now on the whole page to change, and you can send a whole bunch of information in that data. And on the server side, you can basically maintain or persist this stateful session information, which could be a big object graph full of all of your information, a bunch of UI information, whatever is appropriate for your application. And when the server sends back its response, that response could be a very big response, which says basically everything has changed. Here's a bunch of information about the header. Here's a bunch of information about the footer. Here's all of your information about the content of the center. And by doing that, you can handle a large response, a large amount of information with an AJAX request like this, and change everything that's on what you're looking at on the same page. So even though you haven't changed pages, you can make it appear like everything just changed without even changing the page you're on. So hence obviously single page design. So a lot of times you'll be on a page and you'll click something, and without your page refreshing, everything will just kind of completely change. I guess I can kind of give you an example. And I know this is probably a bad example, but on the Progressive website, since I work at Progressive, a Flash application is kind of a good example of a single page design, or any page where nothing changes when you click on any one of the server calls. But I just want to draw your attention to the URL up here. See, this is an example of a normal MVC application where you have, a very specific URL for what you're doing right now. So, notice, when I click something, and obviously I made a request to the server and got a response back, the URL changed. I'm on a different page now. So this is not single page design. we had a Flash application in the past where it basically said, something like progressive.com/main or something like that, and that never ever changed because we would do everything, handle everything with AJAX requests. Tell the server I've decided I want to change, quote unquote pages, and the server says, okay, what page do you want to go to? You say, I want to go to page 2, and it sends you back this massive response, and you just change everything that you're currently looking at based on the response that you get. So you can simulate, everything changing with just AJAX, even though you're never changing the page. So you can, only have one view. That's, basically if you only have one view or one page and you do everything with AJAX, that's single page design. So it's very important. The reason I talked about it for 5 minutes is because it's important before you start developing a web application to decide if you want it to be kind of a traditional web application where the URL keeps changing, or whether you want to go with single page design. And there are pros and cons of each. There are certainly ways to make applications that are not single page design look nice and fluid. So it's not necessarily the case that just because it's not single page it means it's going to be blinking all over the place and looking bad. But at the same time, there are certain design advantages too, both ways. You really just have to think about what you might want, what you might be getting out of having a single page versus multiple pages. So there's pros and cons to both of those. Going forward, at this point, we've really covered most of the techniques that are the foundation of what we're doing going forward. And a lot of the stuff we're going to be talking about is going to be just like how to use different techniques and approaches to using the skills that we already know. So I just wanted to kind of prepare you guys for understanding that we kind of have the essential tools at this point to start talking a little more philosophically, a little more like about good and bad things about different approaches. And we're going to be starting our semester project, so it's going to be a pretty big application that we're working on, and hopefully the main point of this is going to be you asking yourself a lot of these design decisions. Which way do I want to go? Do I want single page? Do I want to use normal MVC where there is multiple views? And other questions that we've brought up along the way that we kind of said that we're going to defer to later. So it's kind of now is later. So we're going to start really trying to tackle some of the bigger questions that we've been putting off because we wanted to learn the basic techniques. So at this point, really, I think AJAX is very simple. It's not too bad, and once you understand kind of the way this works, we can really start digging into some kind of cool discussions about just theoretical pros and cons of different web development techniques. So I'm hoping to get some good discussions going in the near future, over the next few weeks. And I'm gonna basically, at this point, after today's assignment or this week's assignment, I'm going to get you guys starting to work on the semester project. So hopefully we can bring it all together and start making a nice modern responsive web application that follows all the nice standards and modern best practices that are kind of agreed upon by the web development community. So that's pretty much the end. I said I was going to make one video. It turned out to be one really long one. I was kind of ranting a little bit, but it's the way it goes. The good news is, there's not too much code to really kill yourself over this week. So this right here is really the core of what we learned. Just how to use these get and AJAX methods, and the code in the controller can be whatever you want, but just don't worry too much if the C# is a little overwhelming, because I'm not sure if all of you know C#, but that's not that important. And I guess I'll say now, since I've been ranting anyway, I have had some questions about Visual Studio. I'm going to think about it for a little while and see if I can come up with an alternative for those of you who are really uncomfortable with C#. Maybe I'll provide you with like just a nice easy way of completely mocking out the server so that you don't even need Visual Studio. So I'll think about that and I'll get back to you guys. But for now, like I said, just focus on mainly understanding this JavaScript code here and being able to complete the assignment, you can use this code as a reference. And I'll be talking to you guys next week.